So there are so many great things to talk about, to wrap this great course up. What we did last time, we went through the power of sex and actually attached some extra information, optional information for you to really sink your teeth into meiosis. That's really good stuff. We looked at the power of sex from the genetic diversity standpoint. And because of that genetic diversity, we started to contemplate that, hey, not every animal in the population is the same. I'm not a random mater. I'm not just going to mate with any animal. I'm going to be selective. And of course, that selectivity takes many shapes and forms. We looked at intrasexual selection. That's the contest within the sexes, battle of males usually, to win basically the position to be the mating individual. A lot of times harems gather around those males in those kinds of systems. Then we looked at intersexual selection a little bit, at least conceptually, and that's mate choice. Remember that all of this really kind of defines the introductory substrate for sociality. I mean, animals that reproduce sexually, and that is just about every animal on the planet. Yeah, there are some that do asexual, but these animals that we've been focusing on, even the solitary ones, they have to sexually reproduce. And that kind of marks the intro point, the entry point for their sociality. And of course we go all the way up to the point where there are animals that are pair bonding and making nests in the northern hemisphere during the northern hemisphere summer, and then they fly to the south, but in those cases they're doing different things socially. Beautiful systems, all the way up to eusociality, where at its pinnacle, like in the ants, we've got a queen and all of these different workers, and the workers are all females, and they collaborate to produce the superorganism, this extraordinary thing. Well, let's shift our focus right now into a relevant topic as it relates to animal sociality. We're going to focus on animals that are vertebrate animals, and especially higher vertebrates. We're going to focus on mammals especially, maybe a little bit of birds in this concept, even reptiles, but especially vertebrates that are warm-blooded, so animals like us. And we're going to fold in this crazy coronavirus phenomenon a little bit, just a little bit, because it's so important. We, I think, as biologists that study animal behavior, need to kind of understand this because of the fact that this virus, all evidence supports that it came from a vertebrate, warm-blooded animal, specifically a bat. Wow, if it did come from a bat, we have some terms for it. We're going to call this disease, call it a zoonosis. Zoonosis is the singular, and zoonoses would be the plural. Let's get another O in here. So a zoonosis is a disease that can be transmitted from a vertebrate animal to a human. Vert animal to a human. Okay, so that's our first kind of concept of what a zoonosis is. Now, this disease is going to be modified kind of through time. But before we go too far with that, I want to introduce another term. We have what's called an anthropomosis, and that's the singular, ES is the plural, and these are diseases that would be transmitted from human to human. Now, I already mentioned that the bat's part of this story, so we already know that we're dealing with a zoonosis. So we'll come down here, we're going to look at some old school terms. In the old school, zoonosis wasn't the only term. They actually had two different kinds. They had a zoanthroponosis, and the zoanthroponosis was humans to animals. And then they had an anthropozoonosis. And this would be from animals to humans. Now, here's the point. So again, these are old school. Technically speaking now, these have been banned. These have been banned, these terms, by committee, by expert committee. Because I think there was a lot of misuse and a lot of confusion. But it's valuable stuff for us to think of it this way. Zoanthropognosis, humans to animals, and anthropozoonosis, animals to humans. So, what do we think about this? Well, God, look at this is bat to human somehow? Coronavirus? That's our best evidence. So yeah, kind of check that box. And then look at this box over here. This is kind of human to pets and zoo animals. Yeah! We have sniffling cats, especially felids, but also sniffling dogs that have shown positive for this novel coronavirus, this coronavirus that's amongst us now. Wow. So, technically speaking, we've got a two-way street here. Anthropozoonosis from the origins, zoanthropognosis from the reality on the ground. Now, the interesting question that a lot of you might have is, wait a minute now, if my cat gets it, can my cat give it to me? And that's where we have to understand another concept, because scientists are saying that, hey, this goes this way, but it does not go the other way. So we now get to a new concept of the reservoir of a virus, a reservoir of an infection, actually. So a reservoir host, very important concept here. A reservoir host serve as a source of infection. So these are source of an infection, of an infectious agent. Now, in the field that I have expertise in, which is viruses that are transmitted from mosquitoes and other blood-sucking arthropods, but specifically mosquitoes, to vertebrate animals, not all mosquitoes can transmit all of these kinds of viruses equally. Very fascinating stuff. For instance, the West Nile is transmitted by the Culex mosquitoes. We talked specifically about Culex mosquitoes in this class with their behavioral choices. And actually, interestingly, in that story, relating these concepts, we have a zootic phenomenon with West Nile virus. This is a virus that we can get, but we can't be a reservoir for. Birds can get it, and birds can be a reservoir for it. So all of this has to do with concepts, all of this business about who can be a reservoir and who can't. Clearly, if this is true, the bat could be a reservoir. But these zoo animals that we're seeing, again, felids and canids so far, if it's true that they can't be, there's got to be some sort of a concept that can bring this into our mindset. The idea of a reservoir host is that they're going to need to be able to develop a virus load, an infective virus load. Now, virus load is a concept for the virologists. This would be essentially the number of particles of the virus. Uh-oh, I lost that game. Ran out of space there. The number of particles of virus. Particles divided by some unit of volume, usually milliliters. Matter of fact, if you want to know a little bit about virus load in the coronavirus world, here's virus load in the coronavirus world. So we know it's an upper respiratory thing, so it's not so much a bloodborne thing. In my field with West Nile virus, we're looking at a bloodborne virus, and we would be very specifically interested in what's called viremia, with the EMIA ending of viremia being in blood. So here we're actually going to think about the big deals. So NPS, all these acronyms that emerge. This is nasopharyngeal, I guess it's aspirates. It's and NPS. It's NPA. I don't know why that caught me. NPA aspirates. Oh gosh. But anyway, they are sampling this material here, usually from each nostril. Go in, suck it up, and then they have this fluid, and they would be measuring the virus load in that. Other common places for coronavirus, by the way. I got this from old stuff. SARS, if you look it up, is severe acute respiratory syndrome caused by a coronavirus in 2002 and 2003. And it had all of the potential to be like our current coronavirus, but it just, a variety of factors. Possibly due to the virus itself, a lot to do with the virus itself, about how infective that it is, which gets us back to virus load. So let's get to virus load. NPA, nasopharyngeal aspirates, as I mentioned. We would also look for this stuff in serum. We would also look for this stuff in feces, and we could also look at it in, I suppose technically, urine. Whoops, let's get feces there. Urine. Now, here's where the sociobiology comes in. So, the thing is that SARS, basically, in the infected people, all of these individuals, so this is definitely, all of these were basically significant virus loads. Significant virus loads in SARS. We probably are seeing the same thing here. One of our departmental colleagues is actually studying the sewage output to monitor evidence, the RNA of coronavirus in sewage. They've already found it in France. That's where the whole science started. That they're finding this virus there, which is indicating, of course, feces and urine, right? That's what gets into the sewage. So we've got. This is crazy stuff. The very word virus load is kind of a freaky word. I mean, this freaky concept. A load of virus. And load sounds big. The word load is kind of a big word. And when you are sick, you're developing viral loads that are significant. What they call viral loads when it leaves you is viral shedding. And to let you know something scary about this study, because it probably applies to our current coronavirus, this viral shedding kind of thing is that in a study of an afflicted population, viral shedding was lasting 20 days. That was the median, 20 days, and the max was something, good grief, I have to write this down for you. The max that they saw in a small population, this was N of 191 patients, 37 days. So here you are, a person with a viral load, because you're infected with this virus. Of course, you may be asymptomatic in the case of this crazy one that's plaguing us now, and you could be shedding, I mean, this is an extreme, but 37 days, menace to society. Let me say that again. 37 days, menace to society. I mean, that's potential here, based on a very similar virus. Okay, so now it's finally time to synthesize all of this with our animal behavior. This is really what I wanted to say. So, the first thing I want to do is just give a little bit of celebration to this virus, just to show how insanely simple that they are. Of course, this is going to be oversimplified, but Okay, and these things are kind of looking like golf tees. Okay, we're looking good, we're looking good. This is like the pictures that you've seen, and then inside this squiggly business here. So what do we have here? This is the nucleic acid of this virus. This is RNA, because this type of virus is an RNA virus. And then we have this membrane here. And then these are the principal parts. There's also proteins that are kind of embedded in here that actually are significant. In addition to these big proteins. The big proteins, the ones that really kind of give it that characteristic kind of appearance that we look at, is that these are glycoproteins, specific glycoproteins. Now, so the whole virus thing is just menacing, because this RNA here, if you want to get into the cell biology of it, is ready to be basically messenger RNA. They go in and they just straight commandeer our machinery to make their proteins. What? And then, of course, they extrude from the cells, and of course they're infecting certain cells aggressively, upper respiratory tract stuff. And these extruded new particles of virus are then part of the viral load. That's the stuff we're picking up in the NPA, in the serum, and the feces, and the urine. Okay, so now it is time for animal behavior sociality. Let's look at these, and let's kind of look at NPA and all of that. This stuff right here is very, very related to think this. Think saliva. Check mark, it's in saliva. Think feces. Think urine. Now, think about how many animals do you know in their sociality that use these things for social communication? Yeah. Boom, boom, boom. Social communication in animals. So it is a very interesting question of ultimate causation. We see so many reasons why sociality is a good thing. We've talked about social defenses. We've talked about benefits of finding food. Do you remember one little check against sociality that we looked at in the cliff swallows? In the cliff swallows, we thought, yeah, they have information center as to where to find food. They have group defense kind of alarms. They have those benefits. But on the flip side, they were afflicted by parasites. In that animal behavior, that social animal kind of video showcase that I put together, which is really fun to look at, you can see disgusting masses of cliff swallow bugs right there in the nest. Clearly have major impact on cliff swallow young in their development. So we can see the same kind of thing here. Ultimate causation with these great deals. Ultimate causation. The ultimate questions relating to sociality. Somewhere in there, a counterpoint, a counter check has to be disease. And we're talking about diseases that are transmitted through the very nature of the behaviors associated with sociality. So the disease, especially those that are kind of, this is a counter evolutionary check on the ultimate causation of sociality for all the good things it does, would be the diseases that are transmitted in ways that are related to animal behavior communication. Transmitted in ways impacted or facilitated by social communication. That's the huge big take-home point. Think of a dog and the canids. We saw hyenas in the movie intensively communicating through nose to backside, nose to anal rectal area, even to the point of licking. So if you have a fecal viral load in an infection that could be that could be damaging to you, just in the fact that you're communicating with that animal about where you sit in the society of the animal, or about food kinds of opportunities from that animal, or even in the territorial defenses, you could be an animal that's being exposed to viruses. Good grief! If you ever see how bats live, highly social, very close together, packed in together, they aggregate, and you can easily see how if one bat's got it, probably all of them in that group do. And of course, you think about these other systems, is sometimes viruses bring down a whole population and there's a mass die-off, but other times they don't. So you can look at that with a little bit of history from West Nile. The songbirds are the problem, because the songbirds weren't dying from West Nile, but they were definitely producing tons of virus in their bloodstreams that would be picked up by the mosquitoes that fed on them. And then, of course, the mosquitoes that fed on them, if they survived long enough for the mosquito to develop a viral load, then they could deliver that viral load to the next kind of thing it bites, which in the case of it being a horse or a human, could be quite lethal to that animal, even though that animal could never develop a virus load itself that could give rise to a mosquito infection. So these are incredibly complicated, if not bizarrely beautiful phenomena that we have to wrap our brains around. And as animal behaviorists, though, animals get diseases. And a lot of animals get diseases because of their social natures. And it's really important for us to kind of embrace that. Basically, what I'm talking about here is, this great Venn diagram. Here's animal behavior. Here's epidemiology, and that's a sweet spot right there. Of course, what do you know? What do you need to know to understand this? So much more. I mean, there's all sorts of sweet spots here, but who knows? Maybe some of the future for, a very, very diversely interested and motivated, career finder is, let's find the animal behavior side of these threatening viruses that are going to boom and just continue to punch at us. This coronavirus thing and other viruses that have these zoonotic kind of epidemiology. Zoonosis. Zoonosis in our future could be public enemy number one. Anyway, that's a little bit of food for thought, a little bit to kind of bring into the concept that we aren't on an island as animal behaviorists. We actually are as broadly interested and distributed as any scientific discipline. We are definitively interdisciplinary as animal behaviorists. And these are just some of the different aspects that we get to play with. The different tangents, the different things that we can actually find our place as future kind of professional animal behaviors. Where do you live on the map of the interdisciplinary science? Very, very cool. Oh. So that is the menace. That is the bastard that's actually changed us and everything that we do. And it's trouble. So I wanted to give a little bit more clarity about what I meant. So if you look at a time, let's take a look at this thing through time. And we're seeing probably then, here's point of infection. So infection, this thing goes up. And it probably goes like this, just another curve, you know. As I mentioned, that thing could be 37 days for a human with the old SARS virus from 2002 and 2003. This is the period of time that that this virus is cycling. Now, here's the important part. We need to institute a value here. And we'll say this is basically then some sort of a threshold that you as a animal, as a reservoir, host is infective. And so we take a look at that. And maybe we see another animal that goes, whoa. Might even have it the same amount of time. So there's going to be this little window right here of time that this particular individual can give enough virus to present as a reservoir host. It's putting out enough virus that another individual that gets that virus by whatever means, and in the case of these animal behavior things, it could be a dose of saliva, it could be a coughed out bunch of aerosol, and if there's enough coming out for that basically threshold of in the person that gets it to actually get an infection, then that's the way that it works. So not everything is equal here. All sorts of shades of gray. If we looked at this from the perspective of the West Nile thing, this thing right here in West Nile epidemiology could be West Nile virus. This could be a songbird. And then this particular one here could actually be a horse or a human. So they develop viremia, but not enough virus to give it to a mosquito in this particular case. This is a mosquito-borne disease. But the songbirds do, and they're sick, but they're not dying. Yeah, that's another thing we need to think about too. There's a whole set of behaviors that just go with sick behaviors, things that we call sick. And we don't even talk about those in animal behavior. Scratching the surface now because of this. So that is cool. Very cool. So I guess here that we could use words such as viremia. We could also look at words, as I mentioned here, as virus load. Viremia is specific to virus in the blood. The virus load kind of spans all. Blood could have a virus load concept, feces, urine, secretions, as I've mentioned, that's the concept. So that's the idea. There's our beautiful graph. Okay, so now we have that. That I think is enough for me to feel like, turn the crank a little bit. Hope you're thinking about this. I mean, everybody's thinking about the coronavirus, right? But more information, good information, some good terminology, some good concepts. Put this stuff into perspective. Be an expert, or be authoritative. If somebody asks you a question, maybe you'll have an answer, or at least you'll have enough to wade yourself into a good conversation. These are good things to talk about. Can't get off the topic, but I want you to think about this. Think about you shedding virus in the case of coronavirus. And as I mentioned, it's zoonotic, came from a bat. We can give it to pets. But it's mostly, at this point, an anthroponosis. It is us giving to us, giving to us, giving to us. Want you to think about that giving, which is a very evil word in this case, in our case. So here we have this bastard right here, and we have time, and we have virus load, and we have this. And for this particular one, nasty, because that threshold might be really, really low. And the other thing we wanted to factor into that graphically so we can see it is that maybe if you are, symptomatic, but of course you may not even be symptomatic in our case. And then you've got, but even if you develop into symptomatic, this is pre-symptomatic here. You got to get way up here to be symptomatic. I carried that on over because, those symptoms at the end are just horrific, right? Even when you're getting better, if you've survived it. So you see right here that you can be giving this infection to other people for a long, let's say long-ass period of time. Which, of course, we should get into the real spirit of this and recognize who we are and what in the hell we're doing. Let's just say, mask, social, that's the namesake of our class lately, social behavior, social distance, let's do some human animal behavior. That's huge. Human animal behavior is the biggest deal. We're social animals, we want to be together, we live in density, and this virus thrives in density. Period. What are we going to do? I don't know. But we definitely can do certain things. And this is the biology of it. You've got to understand the biology of it. We're social animals, and in us, this is what happens. These two things, that plus that, equal trouble. And that's the trouble we're in. Finally, I think I'm done with my little coronavirus deal. Get out! Get out! Get on out! Get out of there! Well, I certainly hope that was interesting. I hope that it was relevant. Obviously, disease, viruses, zoonoses, none of those things really discussed before by me in an animal behavior class. I do cover all of those things, focusing on different kinds of pathogens, so in this case parasites, in a parasitology class, which is fabulous and is going to be on the table next fall. So if you're into this kind of thing, let's take a look at parasites. Come and join me in the fall. We'll figure it out. We are now going to go back into our mating thing. One more thing. I keep telling you, this coronavirus thing is there. How many people have acquired coronavirus through kissing? Think about this. If the majority of people are asymptomatic and people less likely to develop significant symptoms are probably kissing a lot more frequently than other age groups, possibly. Wow. And then the tragic side of this, of course, is the kiss of death. Our social communication as humans is based on mating of an intensive pair bonding system and their behaviors to maintain our pair bonding. Of course, it's pair bonding. Sexual system is called monogamy. Now, we're going to get way into all sorts of polygamous systems, but the monogamous system is not too bad of a place to start. So pair bonding is incredibly intense, it represents the pinnacle of recognition of individuals. And there are a whole host of behaviors that are associated with this. The behaviors of affection is what we would call them by the time we get up into the higher primates, right? So pair bonding, huge part of monogamy. I think if we were to look at the social dynamics of pair bonding, we'll come up with our first map. So let's take an example, not of us in our kiss of death, but songbirds. And songbirds are interesting because they're going to be pair bonding. And by the way, sometimes the pair bonding isn't the super tight ship because there's a lot of cheating on the outside. But of course, find a pair bonding species where there's not these days, and it's harder to find than what we originally thought. So pair bonding is the deal. And monogamy, there's different kinds of monogamy. There's genetic monogamy. That's the true monogamy. It's one plus one. You've got female gamete, male gamete, and all of the offspring are made from that same lineage of female and male in a genetic pair bonding versus a social monogamy. So we have social monogamy. This means, I build a nest with you, we hang out together, and we have infidelity. And of course that could be polygynous, polyandrous, or polygynandrous. All sorts of different variations on that. But in true monogamy, you've got social monogamy. And the other kind of monogamy is genetic monogamy. And in genetic monogamy, that is the rigid monogamy. By the way, we will classify these things also seasonally. Like you might form a pair bond and make all of your offspring with one individual in 1 year, but then have a new pair bond the next year. In songbirds, though, a lot of times they are at least socially monogamous for life, and that is pretty cool. So pair bond, often for life, quite often social monogamy. That is quite often the case with songbirds. And the other thing is that songbirds, specific diets, whatever their diets are, there are reasons that a songbird needs to kind of be territorial. So oftentimes we see pair territories. Not only do we see pair territories in kind of the hypothesis and the observations of science have shown that as habitat becomes more patchy and changing with the impacts of Homo sapiens, we're seeing that it gets a lot more competitive, and a lot of times you'll see last year's brood at least one of last year's broods sticking around to help the parents. It could be a really good decision because then if the parents vacate or die or whatever from that nest site in that territory, that male inherits that territory. But we have pair territories. That's the important thing. So there we are to territoriality as social behavior, and of course that's going to be within your species, chasing everything else off from that area. Lots of energy to be spent. Dear enemy effect, like maybe those guys over there, I know who they are, so at least I'm not going to lose my mind over them being there. New intruders, up the stakes, payoff asymmetry, all that good stuff we've talked about is in this story. Pair bonding, often for life, social monogamy, pair territories. So let's take a look at what this looks like, kind of as a general picture. So we'd have, here's a male and a female. Here's a male and a female. This is just a shorthand version of our territorial map. Male and female. Not all territories will be equal. Not all of them will be equal in size. Not all of them will be equal in value. And some of these territories will probably be not so good compared to others. So that's a little map of these territories. Matter of fact, right now, I just saw him yesterday, Sparky and Lynette are long-standing European sparrows, European house sparrow, that they nest in our house, basically. There's a structure in a porch that we have that they can just go way up. I mean, as a matter of fact, from where I stand right now, Sparky and Lynette, I'm in the basement, so they're up a whole floor, but they're almost right above me. And they're busy right now as I speak, collecting nest materials to cram into this beautiful kind of protected cavern. They usually produce more than one brood a year, which is pretty cool. And they're really great parents. So, and they're here every year. And this is a residential species. This European house sparrow, whatever they're doing during the winter is one thing, but they always come back to our house and they always go into our place. That's their territory. So this monogamy system, we need to kind of construct some more rigid ideas about what kind of a situation could produce this. So a little bit more on monogamy with a broader perspective here. So I think what you'll generally see here is things associated with monogamy. With monogamy, you'll often see mate guarding. And of course, that kind of prevents other actions. Other cuckoldry basically is the idea. And cuckoldry would be basically visiting. This is an old kind of term. This is hundreds and hundreds of years old. Cuckoldry is technically just defined as visiting the wife while away at work. That's the kind of the old English definition of cuckoldry. So preventing cuckoldry. If you as a male are not guarding the female and you disappear, another male can come in. And of course, if there's a mating involved, then your fitness goes down. The cuckold's fitness goes up. That's how that works. So cuckoldry. The other thing, however, that relates to fitness would be maid assistance. And we looked at both of these things kind of through the eyes of little voles, way at the very beginning of the class. We were fundamentally working out our understanding of proximate causation and ultimate causation, but we were really using this to do it. So, maid assistance, and this helped raise the offspring, very common in higher animals, very important. So I guess with monogamy, these are some of our kind of ultimate kinds of considerations for us to kind of play in with here. And now we're going to move into polygamy. And we're going to look at polygamy through these lenses. So polygamy, sometimes we will look at a fundamental question is the female monopolized? So is the female monopolized? That's a fundamental question. A lot of times you'll see this when there are limited resources. So space could be limited, food could be limited, and therefore the female has to be there, and if the male holds that, she's monopolized. That's the whole idea. And then we have other systems where the female is not monopolized. And if that's a particular case, we have a different situation. So this, an example of this could be a harem, basically in a particular territory. And we're going to see examples of this, by the way. These aren't specific examples. A female thing where there's usually ample resources, so relatively unlimited resources. is the idea here. And in this particular case, you could look at something like a lek. So we saw a lek in the video of the sharp-tailed grouse and the sage grouse, and those guys are doing their thing, and that's a worthless territory in terms of resources. It's just a place where they gather to then basically display, and the whole mating selection process works itself out. And again, remember that the hot shot is usually the big winner. So that's an example of not being monopolized. Those females don't need to be there for any other reason than mates. And so that's one of the things that we'll often look at, is monopolized or not. And there's a couple of other examples of this. That's a lek. And another example is what we call explosive breeding. And an example of explosive breeding could be, of course, in my mosquitoes. Not the exquisite courting mosquitoes, but I'm talking about swarming mosquitoes, swarming insects, mating swarms. So at the end of this whole process, we'll actually take a look at that. But if you've ever been kind of riding your bike or jogging or even just walking in the wrong place at the wrong time, which usually means dusk, and you get a mouthful of tiny little flies, you're dealing with mosquitoes or their close relatives that form these male mating swarms, and then females fly in or by, and then it's just this explosive kind of crazy process of males flying aggressively to that female, identifying that female by the sound of her wing beat and tackling her in midair. And then, of course, if everything works out, the first one that gets there and achieves this feat of alignment is the one that mates with that female. And the interesting thing about that is that it's a polygynous system, meaning males having more than one, but the females are monogamous, and they're monogamous by induction from seminal secretions. So seminal fluid includes materials in these tiny little flies, substances in these flies that shut the female down from receiving other mates for life. And that is spectacular stuff that actually has gone into the realms of a mosquito control strategy now. Anyway, there's so many things to say, and so little time to do so. We've got to get back on course, and we're going to go through various systems of polygynous systems, basically. Okay, it is now time for us to deal with the background information. Lots of concepts that relate to being social animals. So, mating systems. Mating systems in social species. Social species, and this is going to be our background information. Lots of great work here for us to kind of get words and concepts to structure all future discussions. So here we have, the first is relating to costs and benefits of group life. We've been through a lot of this before, but I'm going to basically frame it all up very nicely. So we mentioned that we have kind of hunting and foraging. We've talked about specific examples, cooperation. We talked about different kinds of things like information center hypotheses. There's another thing called local enhancement, or maybe you can be able to take bigger prey. But that's a great benefit. So more prey, if you're a predator, perhaps, maybe bigger prey. Think of groups of animals that take down one giant animal and then eat it for a long time. So that's that, cost of benefits. The other one is passive defense. We've already talked about this as well. So these are things that you know. Passive defense. And remember, you're basically safer by dilution. So we saw this before. And let's see. Then we have active defense. That can be a benefit. Active defense. So you think of meerkats. You think of some that are scouting for predators. Scouting for predators. Prairie dogs, everybody's making vocalizations, scouting for predators, even cliff swallows. We talked about this. Then you would have, these are your benefits. So let's get the green chalk. These are your benefits. And then we'll draw over here some costs. And you have a cost here of food competition with the individuals in your group. And you are perhaps more conspicuous to predators. Even though you're safer by dilution, you're more conspicuous to predators. So there we have the costs and the benefits. We're going to come up with some definitions now. So that's our next thing. So there we go. Definitions related to mating systems. Okay, here we go. Nice definitions here. Some of this stuff will be familiar, some will be new. So, social hierarchies. Social hierarchies that are, of course, in groups. Briefly mentioned this, and as I mentioned, it requires recognition. And these hierarchies are achieved through aggression. Achieved through aggression. It's kind of interesting. They actually reduce flat out fighting and injury. You're familiar, a dominant individual, subordinate individual. I'll show your teeth, boom. This conflict is over. And as opposed to, hey, every time, we see each other and this hierarchy is not established, we have to fight, which can often cause lots of injury and damage. So this clearly is a thing that reduces fighting and injury, these hierarchies. Basically, the rule is you defer, you stand down to those above, and you bully those below, or you rule over, you bully those below. That's how it works. And it might just be ruthless. It might seem ruthless, but it is a lot less ruthless than the all-out fight and injury of conflict. So that's what we've got. In the system, we see male hierarchies. And male hierarchies are they're common. We also see female hierarchies, and they also seem to be common. Different kinds of systems. But hierarchies are very common and very important. So social hierarchies. The next thing for us to discuss is the concept, just get the definitions out of polygamy. Okay. All right. In polygamy, this means greater than one mate in a breeding season. Or I should say cycle. A breeding season or cycle greater than one mate. So we can have simultaneous polygyny, polygamy. And that basically is an individual maintaining numerous partners. An individual maintains numerous partners, meaning more than one. And then we have sequential. So in sequential, it's going to be, short-term bonds through a season. So in the season, I'm polygamous, but I reproduced with this individual. And then in the next window, I reproduce with this individual. And then the next, so on and so forth. So that's how that works. So this is, like you say, multiple through the season. All right. The next thing is kind of types of polygamy. This is the definition of it. So types of polygamy. And the types of polygamy fall into polygyny. They fall into polyandry. So this is greater than one female, greater than one male per female. And then we have polygynandry. So each individual is acting in that particular way. And then finally, this last one, versus, of course, monogamy. Always to remember monogamy. Okay, then the next part that we should remember, we've talked about this, is territory is often involved in mating systems. And just remember, this is a defended area, the part of a home range. And a lot of territories are mating territories. So, mating territories, very, very common for these to be associated with mating. Then we have, continuing down, the terms that I want you to always be thinking about. This is all stuff we've talked about before. Would be resources. And resources, of course, would include food, mates, nesting sites, shelter. These are the biggies. And then another term that we need to get out there is the concept of courtship. Now we have to define courtship as stereotypic, pre-copulatory behavior, and that's that. So those are the terms that we're going to carry in and always have kind of in our back pocket, these concepts, because when we go through different mating systems, a lot of these words, these terms, these concepts will be actually just kind of assumed and brought in to those stories. So here we go. Buckle your chin straps, because this is the big showcase of polygyny coming down our way. We've already given some respect to monogamy, but now we're going to deal with polygyny, a little bit of polyandry. Great stuff coming down the pipe. Great stuff to end a great semester.